Hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here, and I was recently featured as a guest on the Superconscious University podcast hosted by a guy called Scott that I'd recently met at the UK Hypnosis conference. And what I thought I would do is not only share you my copy of the recording, but give you some of the links so that if you are curious to learn more about Scott and his podcast, Superconscious University, then you can check out the links and his YouTube channel and things like that. So this is quite a long conversation, I think over 45 minutes, of how I started in hypnosis, some of the blocks and barriers that I had to overcome, what made the transition for me from working in PR to actually becoming a hypnotherapist, and many other things as well. One of the more controversial things is my approach to mental health and the medical metaphor not always being empowering. So if you're interested in hearing this conversation where rather than me being the host, I'm the guest, then relax and just check this episode out.
Wonderful, Adam. So it's so good to finally have you on. I've been aware of a lot of your stuff for the last couple of years, and I think we just almost like caught each other, like glances eyes as we're sort of moving past each other at the UK Hypnosis conference. So it's been lovely to be able to finally have a proper conversation together.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind, Adam, is obviously sort of understanding about the work that you do. How does a guy who refers to himself as or used to refer to himself as a socially anxious nerd end up becoming a self-millionaire at 27 and then goes on to become a hypnotherapist for essentially the royal family? That's, I'm sure, a wonderful story, and I know that you've touched on it in some pieces in other podcasts before, but it'd be great to be able to explore that in a little bit more detail today if you're up for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if the 18, 19-year-old version of me met who I am now. I think, it would be because I'm very, very different. Clearly, I'm the same person, but, I'm very different now than I was back then. So I was quite a shy, introverted teenager. I consider myself smart, but equally terrified of failing. So I would always like do the minimum level of kind of revision and kind of coursework, because in my mind, it was better to maintain this identity or belief that I was smart than really study hard and then get a B. It was better for me to kind of do it at the last minute and do that. So I had these kind of feelings of kind of fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. And there was a silver lining to that, because throughout my childhood, and I didn't realize I had that belief, but you can kind of figure it out retrospectively. But if you don't believe you're good enough and you're not happy with that, you try and make yourself better. So I did that through mainly learning. I thought if I knew more, then I could kind of improve my ability. I think I use the analogy that intelligence is like the processor and what you learn is like apps. So it kind of makes sense to kind of learn more things, then you've got more capabilities. So it came with that. And also I got quite into kind of lifting weights when I was kind of like 12, 13 and that kind of stuff. But at the core, I was still this very insecure, very shy, introverted boy. I went and studied psychology, left home at the age of 18. And there was just a series of unfortunate events. I chipped my tooth, which made me worry about people perceiving me in a certain way. The cold wind made my skin go quite red, and I had kind of skin conditions. And I didn't want people to perceive me that way because that wasn't who I thought I normally was. So I avoided people. But if you avoid people in the first 2 or 3 months of university, you don't really build the social networks. So I became, quite isolated, which heightened up my social anxiety because I didn't really know people. And then it kind of created this element of almost like a cycle of kind of anxiety, despair, hopelessness, until it reached a point where I remember like going to the edge of my kind of bedsit effectively had this window that kind of went out onto a flat roof. And I remember standing on that flat roof looking down at the pavement, genuinely considering like diving headfirst into the pavement because I couldn't see a viable future for me based on how I was. And I think a lot of people going through tough times fall into the trap of extrapolating where they are now into their future and assuming that if life's pretty shit now, it's going to be shit forever
Yeah.
without realizing that we've got the capacity to make changes and we can change stuff in our present that absolutely alters the future. And as hypnotherapists, we completely understand that that's why future pacing and pseudo orientation in time is so important, because if we do the right intervention, how they think about their future changes. I didn't know any of this stuff back then, but the thought that popped into my head is when I genuinely considered ending it all, it kind of became liberating because I thought I've got nothing to lose now because anything I try isn't going to be as bad as not existing. And there was two things. One, creating two different timelines. Timeline of the status quo, like if I didn't change, life would be pretty bleak if you've got that level of social anxiety and kind of hopelessness. And then this other timeline of if I can get through this, then what else is possible for me? So that was one element that made the change. And the other thing was taking full responsibility. Part of what was causing my anxiety and kind of anger to some extent was having this list going through my head of all the people that wronged me and all the people that caused me to be in a shitty place. But of course, blame takes the locus of control outside of you, and there's not a lot that you can do. So I had this kind of reckoning where I asked a really difficult question, and it was almost like this, what you would call radical personal responsibility. But what if I'm in this shitty place because of how I think, what I believe, choices that I've made, things that I value and don't value? What if I'm responsible for all of this? It's almost like that Scooby-Doo meme where they take the mask off, like who's responsible
Mm.
for all my problems? And it's your own face. So it was those two things, and it liberated me to find a solution. I didn't know what the solution was, but I was studying psychology with severe social anxiety. But luckily, there was a 24-hour library. So I was able to avoid people and still learn about this. And what I was learning was about all the therapeutic modalities, everything from kind of behavioral psychology, psychoanalysis, it all. But when I came across NLP and hypnosis, I became a guinea pig and I wanted to test what worked on me. And I say this to when I work with clients, like the evidence of a good therapy session is not what happens in the session, it's what happens in your real life. So I started journaling and it's like, right, I want to work on this thing and then see if it creates progress. And it did in certain areas. Okay, do the thing that works the best. And I was able to go from a suicidal, socially anxious recluse at the age of 19 um, at 21, I just managed to get through my degree at psychology. I didn't attend the first year, but managed to get that with a 2-1. Got a job in a radio station selling, and I thought that actually, psychology I felt was a skill, and I was interested in the psychology of influence. So where do you best get to kind of practice that skill of influence? Selling to other people. So, I got a job at a radio station selling. And then that led to working in public relations. At the age of 23, I set up my own agency. By the age of 27, on paper, I was a self-made millionaire. People that understand finance will know that it's not as impressive as it sounds because effectively what you have is total assets less total liabilities. I was a paper millionaire.
Mm.
Didn't mean I had £1 million in the bank or anything like that, but my assets were worth that amount. Um, and for about, I don't know, like 15 years, something like that, just focus on building that business. The money I made from that business, I bought properties and investments. But it was at the age of 35 when I stumbled across this concept called Ikigai. And I kind of thought, okay, I'm doing all right, fairly successful, in certain areas, but not really feeling that fulfilled. So at the age of 34, 35, I came across this concept of Ikigai, and it was like the bit of the four circle Venn diagram missing was fulfillment and passion. And it was like, okay, what do I think about, even though I don't get paid for it, and even if I don't have to do it, and it was psychology, and it was hypnosis, and it was things about personal change. And then literally the next day I signed up for a postgraduate course in clinical hypnotherapy. And then that's how it started. What really got me high level clients is that because I had a background in business running my own agency, I was able to almost like miss out a few of the steps. A lot of people learn hypnotherapy, but they don't have the business and marketing skills,
Yes.
which means they don't quite get enough clients to make it work. Whereas I thought, what is the pinnacle of hypnotherapy perception wise? And it was being a Harley Street hypnotherapist. It's like, right, I'm going to start there. Having a PR agency helped because I was able to offer free sessions to kind of reality TV stars and kind of former pop stars and those kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
then turn that into more media coverage. So I was able to get featured in kind of radio, TV, glossy magazines, and when you've got an impressive client base, you have credibility by association. When you have an impressive address, you have credibility by association again. It's all these tools of prestige. And basically, my theory back then was you can learn about hypnotherapy. And I clearly was fascinated by learning about hypnotherapy. But I have this belief that you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You've got to jump in the pool. So my approach was if I'm going to be a good hypnotherapist, and I wanted to be a good hypnotherapist, I've got to see lots and lots of clients and do it a lot. And I had the ability to generate lots of clients. And then that led on to the journey. So, when you hear these kind of like, it's almost like a before and after picture with weight loss. It's like if you just jump to the extremes, it kind of seems almost like too impressive. But actually, it was about personal responsibility and kind of um, reevaluating the risk reward ratio of, well, if you don't try stuff, you're guaranteed to kind of fail. You
Mhm.
might as well try stuff, learn stuff, get better. And it was a series of that over a long period of time that kind of got me to where I am now.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't consider myself um, you know, successful because it's all comparative. Compared to certain people, I would say I'm a resounding failure, and to other people, they would say, "Oh, you're an incredibly successful person." Depends what perspective you look at, and I'm happy with where I've got to. I've still got big goals of where I want to get to, but that's the journey. It was going from very high levels of insecurity and low self-worth to actually thinking, you know what, I'm going to start believing in myself and acting as if I've got the capability to learn stuff and get better, which then became a
Yes.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
I love that. And when you started to say about almost like your hit list, like the enemy list of people who you wanted to prove wrong, I genuinely thought you were going to say that was the fuel that then drove you later on down the line. But it sounds like there was a lot of self-reflection that happened before your business success took off. Because normally the classic entrepreneurial story is use what you've got. And normally when we feel like we don't have anything, it's let's use that anxiety or feeling of not enough to drive an external success that then gives us the time and space to maybe reflect internally. But it sounds like a lot of that happened almost out of the traditional sequence for you. Is that right?
Yeah, there was an element of personal responsibility where it was like, no, I've done this, and it kind of dawned. I was fortunate to have two insights that turned out to be quite helpful. Being 19 with what anyone would describe as generalized anxiety disorder and depression, they would say, right, go to a doctor, go to a GP. I know for a fact that they would have medicated me. They would have put me on an antidepressant, maybe beta blockers, SSRIs. It would have been kind of things that didn't actually figure out what was causing all this, but just kind of treated the symptoms. And at that age, I was just determined. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just I'm creating this at some level. And then the extension of that was, what if I'm creating all of it? That kind of radical personal responsibility to the extent where everything was kind of like down to me. And clearly that wasn't true. There were certain environmental factors, genetic factors, situational factors. But when you take the view that, because if you look at these kind of victimhood mentality, it's everyone else's fault but my own.
Yeah.
And then that radical self, kind of personal responsibility and self-acceptance is no, nothing that anyone else has done has anything to do. I control all of it. Neither of those beliefs are actually true. It is somewhere in the middle, but it's better to have this kind of element of that. But there was some elements of, I think I was driven by a polarity response because I remember my mum, and she was very frustrated because I was, not doing, a lot. I'd kind of returned home in my second year of uni because there was no point kind of living where I was. Wasn't a good situation. And I remember, she worked in radio, and I was asking her about her job, and she was like, "Why are you asking?" It's like, "Oh, no, I'm just curious what you did." And straight away she said, "You could never do what I do." Um, and and
Rookie
actually,
mistake.
it was the best thing she could have said,
Yeah.
because if she had that kind of, let's say, more nurturing kind of approach of you can do anything that you want, which is the kind of what parents should be saying to kind of children, actually that almost gets rejected of, yeah, but you would say that because you might. The fact that she said, like, you don't have what it takes to do what I do, that was almost like a red rag to a bull. And it was kind of like, I'll prove you wrong. And I had no interest she worked in a radio station. I had no interest in working in a radio station and that kind of stuff. But the fact that she said I couldn't do it suddenly made it really kind of appealing. Um, and what was helpful for that is I was able to look at sales as a psychological game. So I read every book on sales, but there was a particular book written by Richard Bandler and John Laval called Persuasion Engineering,
Mm.
and it was effectively the how to utilize principles of NLP and what Bandler then called design human engineering into influence within a sales. So there I was working in this sales job, and it was like, I get to practice this stuff. So when people go to like 2-day workshops, they get to like practice language patterns and for a couple of hours, and then the training's done. But if you turn your work into kind of constant training, your learning curve becomes exponential, and then you get to learn better. I didn't really want to be a radio sales rep, but I wanted to get very good at learning some of the language elements and the rapport building. And it was a car crash to begin with. I remember the pacing and mirroring that I tried to do when I first got there. And one of the older, kind of people there was just like, he was laughing at, he knew that, you were scratching your chin when he was scratching it. And it was
Yeah.
just because I hadn't refined that element of sensory acuity, and kind of rapport is not mimicry. It's kind of feeling an alignment with someone. So it wasn't an easy ride by any stretch of the imagination. And there was still an element of wanting to prove a few people wrong. But fundamentally, I think you always do better if you're acting from a place of kind of growth and progression, rather than, that kind of fuck you approach of, right,
Mm.
I'll make you eat your words. Like you're never going to have the same level of congruency if you do it to kind of get back at someone.
Yeah. What sort of year was that? Because I remember, even if we go back 20 years ago, there would have been this huge, actually, even if we go back further, sort of 90s and 80s, that big surgence of like mirroring on steroids and people starting to feel, dude, what are we doing right here? I'm not speaking to a real person. I'm speaking to someone who's like really like badly timed anchoring techniques, touching the
Oh,
shoulder
it's
or the,
clunky, it's clumsy.
yeah.
And I think, I think a lot of people when they learn about NLP, it feels like wizardry, and it's kind of like, all right, I'm going to learn these techniques and I'm going to do NLP on you. And and I think when you run into those people every now and, like, less so now, but in the past, and then there would be certain kind of like embedded commands like clunkily, and it's kind of like, I know what you're doing, and
Yeah.
it's horribly awkward. But it is that element, I think, of sometimes you've got to do something badly before you get good. And if you think of that levels of learning where you don't know how bad you are, and then you're kind of conscious of your incompetence, you kind of need that. And I, thinking about it, it's like it's only a problem if you stay at that level of awkwardness and kind of clunky language patterns, and you meta model everything. But if you get beyond that and you're like, well, I'm going to use it when the context is relevant and useful for what I want to do, actually, it is really useful. I think a lot of people look down at some of the early NLP, kind of approaches, but structurally, meta model, clarity, Milton model, influence, these are powerful principles. And if you can utilize them well, they are like a superpower. But I think a lot of people, they learn them badly. They don't ever get to unconscious competence in those areas. And therefore, they kind of crowbar them in almost like hand grenades to kind of throw them into a communication setting, and they don't work out well.
I think that there's I don't know if it's a similar pattern for everyone, but there are certainly, and you've touched on this really beautifully as well, about there being no secret. It's just reps, right? And the where you're telling me about the kind of people who do it in a very clunky way, that's probably like I'd say before the 500 reps
Yeah.
range, where they're still so in their head that we haven't allowed just to start feeling our way through it at that point. I still remember one of the best job. It was a horrendous job. One of the most powerful jobs I ever had would have been telesales, doing 400 connects a day. And you'd go through the training, and they did some really basic NLP, and we're talking, must be about 16, 17 years ago. And I remember getting ready for that first call. Okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, I know the NLP things that they've been speaking about. This is before I trained with Bandler a couple of years after that. And I got ready for that first call. And the guy picked up and I said, "Hello, is that Mr. Wilson?" And just straight away, "Oh, fuck off, mate." And suddenly, so he broke my patterns. And I said, "Well,
Hmm.
would you?" And he said, "Listen, mate, if you call me again, I'll stab you in the face." And I thought that I hadn't had a call like that ever since that in any context.
Hmm.
But it was the ultimate pattern breaker where it was like, okay, I need to have like lots and lots of different reps before I should even think that I should have the right, like, to assume that this could go well. But had I not done that, the 400 calls over and over again, even just something simple like rapport, never would have made it onto the radar at an unconscious level, right?
Mm.
So no, I really, really appreciate you sharing the idea behind the reps there. And so we did some of those pieces. We then signed up to the hypnosis course because we started to realize this is what I would do, even if, frankly, I wasn't getting paid for it. And then you mentioned something else that I really loved, which is about that importance of marketing. I feel like if you were to break hypnosis down into sub skills, hypnosis isn't one skill, right? It could be inductions, metaphors, deepeners, yeah, nested loops, you name it. We're going to pop it in there, and suddenly you've got the illusion of hypnosis. But there's almost like a fourth macronutrient that most hypnotherapy schools, I don't think they teach very well, which is the marketing side. Because if we can't get a client in front of us in the first place, then we cannot get those reps to actually be a good hypnotherapist, no matter what training school we go to or no matter what certification. I'm wondering, was there anything specifically along the hypnosis journey where you learned more about marketing, or were you really just using the stuff that allowed you to become successful in the past and you leveraged that to just take off?
Yeah, I think my first thought when you said that was it was a flashback of the final day of my postgraduate diploma. And at this point, I'd done 3 years of studying clinical hypnotherapy. And they said something like, only 3% of you in this room are going to be actually regularly working with clients. And they said part of that is that, you won't be able to generate enough clients to make you sustain it. And I remember thinking, if they know that, and that's a real stat,
Yeah.
why are they not selling a marketing course of how to get clients for hypnotherapists? People have invested like all that time, all that effort. They've done these dissertations, they've got the grade, and they're like, yeah, you're not going to make it. And that's coming from the people leading the course. There is a clear element of authority and a post-hypnotic suggestion linked there, like, you're not going to make this. And I don't think it was designed as a polarity response either to kind of like fire them up to kind of do it. I think you could just like see the optimism like dim down in the eyes of all these people. So one, I think the training courses should take more responsibility at managing expectation. I think there's some bait and switch sometimes where they're like, you can make 6 figures a year as a hypnotherapist and, quit your job and just help people. Right? That's quite attractive to people. But if you find out after that, yeah, you can do that. And you can get, two, three, £400 an hour as a hypnotherapist, but only once you've got a certain level of credibility, once you've got a certain reputation, once you've got a client base, once you've got some way of generating clients on a consistent basis. But they don't tell you that. They say you can make this much money as a hypnotherapist. That is true, but it's not the full truth. Um, my first experience of doing any kind of marketing for a hypnotherapist, I lived in a town called Luton, horrible place. Hope no one from Luton's listening to this.
I'm
And
glad you said it instead of me.
well, I lived there for 7 years. I could say it with authority. But I had this little self-employed business where I was teaching people, like, people have satellite TV, but they couldn't get access to all the channels. So I wrote this little guide, Secrets of Satellite TV. and I was posting it through every letterbox of someone that had a satellite dish. And then this short, stocky guy started running down the street in like a bath towel around his waist. I thought, what the fuck is happening here? Like this is odd. And it was a hypnotherapist based in Luton, and he was like, can you deliver this? And he showed me his kind of flyer, and it's like, well, I'm putting stuff through letterboxes anyway. Yeah, of course I can. So I called him up and I said, look, I don't want money. I just want to shadow your hypnosis sessions. So, there I was, maybe at the age of like 2021, and I must have seen about 20 hypnosis sessions. And this guy at the time was quite well regarded, very kind of authoritative kind of style. But I saw some techniques there and it was useful. But I remember thinking like how he did it is an advert in the Yellow Pages, the occasional local newspaper ad, and it had these flyers through the letterboxes. So that gave me a taste that okay, you can generate clients just by doing that. Um, and I thought of that, and I remember printing off, at the age of like 22, doing that, and then I changed direction, and it's kind of like I had this idea of I need more life experience before I become this, and I just kind of really went into the my own PR agency and started taking on staff and those kind of things. But when I came back to it, originally I was using Google Ads, and I made a horrible mistake. I had weight loss clients, and I was buying keywords on things like liposuction, bariatric surgery, and I wasted like honestly £20,000 on just irrelevant keywords. They call it a stupidity tax, and it was like, but you learn from that. And then I started buying very specific keywords like hypnosis to lose weight, weight loss hypnotherapy. And when they become targeted, I had a conversion rate. And then I rented out, I think it was a 6 hour block every Sunday morning in Harley Street. And it's like, well, I had that on a contract, so I didn't want to have it empty if I'm paying for it. So my goal was I need to get four clients every Sunday, like
Mm.
starting at 8, finishing at, I think it was 2 that I was finishing at. And that gave me like a mini thing. So I did enough Google ads to get enough consultation calls, convert enough of those to clients. And that's where you get the reps when you've actually got the client in front of you. And I think for any hypnotherapist that's just starting, find a very, very specific niche, get very, very good at that. I chose weight loss to begin with. Every client um, was similar in the sense that they wanted to lose weight. They tried certain things, they couldn't. They had beliefs of like learned helplessness. And then if you just specialize in a particular area, you almost come across as psychic to the person that is in front of you because you've seen enough people like them that you can you can say what they're thinking before they even say it. And then they're like, wow, this person knows where I'm at, and that element really helps to kind of establish credibility, build your confidence. And now the kind of hypnotherapy I do is very varied. It's almost like the beginning. Do you remember the TV show A Team?
Mm. Of
Where at
course.
the beginning they'd have some kind of mission. When I do a consultation call now, because it comes from the podcast, it's kind of like, well, I've got this problem, and it can go off in all different directions. It's like, okay, this is the thing, and now it's incredibly varied. But for a while, it was weight loss, and it was phobias, and the occasional kind of addiction. And what I found is initially paid for ads was my approach plus PR. PR is great for credibility,
Yeah.
not so great for acquiring clients. The big change for me was when COVID came along. I decided to stop all my Google ads, get out of Harley Street, and I started a podcast called The Hypnotist. And my approach was um, I want to have an outlet for my hypnosis, and I had no way of knowing that that little podcast that I started in March. When was that? 20. When was COVID? 2020, 2021.
It's 2020, yeah.
2020, yeah. And I think it's approaching like 17 million streams and downloads now. But when I started that with just like me sharing my hypnosis, I had no idea that it would do that. So people will have their ideas. Like podcasting has worked for me, YouTube has worked for me. I know there's a couple of people. Howard Cooper uses Instagram and TikTok. Lester Fu over in the States uses TikTok as a primary way of doing it.
Yeah.
Like everyone's got their opinions. You've just got to find a way of generating awareness of you, what you do, and a way of onboarding either clarity calls, consultation calls, and then they become clients. You just got to find something that works. You don't have to know everything. Just
Mm.
find one way of kind of turning strangers into clients, and that's enough.
Yeah. Because I imagine that because you've moved more, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like you've moved much more to a generalist hypnotherapist because frankly you've built a platform where you can afford to do that. I'd say if someone generally wants to get to their first 5 to 10K per month, very, very challenging to do as a general hypnotherapist starting off, right? Which is completely in line with the find a niche, create a great offer, and make sure
Yep.
that messaging is like a perfect match. So I understand that the way that you now get clients is going to be very, very unique and much more difficult to be able to mirror for other people going forward.
Yeah, I mean, effectively now, if someone did my approach, they would be inadvertently sending traffic to me because what they would do is I've got 1,900 episodes. So if someone did a hypnosis episode on Spotify, the person listening would hear that one and then it would recommend my episodes next, but I've got more of a back catalog, so it would just generate. So I would say these windows open and they close. Like I was too late for YouTube. There are, I think, some average hypnotherapists, and they've got 2 million subscribers and they've got like millions of views every time. And it's kind of like, why? First mover advantage. They
Yeah.
they they built a presence on YouTube. I feel like I've got that on the podcast. I don't have that on YouTube. Exactly the same content goes out on YouTube, and it gets a fraction of the listeners on Spotify because there was quite a few hypnosis channels on YouTube, and there wasn't like a really consistent actually doing hypnosis. Lots of training ones and kind of hypnotherapists interviewing other hypnotherapists, but there wasn't consistently like you can experience the hypnosis. So I got lucky, I think. But part of getting lucky is trying
Yeah.
stuff, and then every now and then you hit, this kind of need that people don't know that they need in the way that they want it, and then you can get lucky. And I would say, um, those people that were quick to move on TikTok, 4 or 5 years ago, some of them have got like half a million, kind of followers.
Mm.
Great. And the good thing is there's always going to be new stuff. Like there was a time where, Facebook, you could make a video, it would go viral. You can't do that now. It's almost impossible to get a viral video on Facebook. So I think, again, it comes back to sensory acuity, try stuff, see what works. And then once you find that thing that works, double down on that. It's still possible to do it with paid ads. You could definitely do it, but you have to make sure that the numbers work. If you're spending, £100 on an advert to get one client, and then you charge £100 per session, the numbers don't make sense. You've got to reverse engineer it and say, right, is the game even winnable? And then if it is, keep doing it. And when you get, my approach to kind of pricing is you get these business coaches and they're like, triple your prices. It's like, well, supply and demand. Like if you triple your prices and you've got no clients, that's a bad idea. My approach is whenever I get to a certain level of busyness, increase my prices. And then what tends to happen is that the number of clients I work with dips temporarily, but the income remains the same. But I've now freed up more time to create more courses or do more organic content and those kind of things. So my advice is don't just increase your prices at the point when you don't mind if they drop off a little. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah. I think to jump on the back of that as well, what you've proven to everyone as well is consistency, right? 1,900 episodes is just no joke, right? So to be able to find an outlet where you can, like, where you could consistently do that, because I'm guessing that you probably didn't see too much traction for the first 30 to 50 episodes.
Hardly any. And that was why it was important that wasn't my motive. My
Mm.
motive to begin with was, um, almost like when you hear stories of like, Van Gogh, like he wasn't trying to sell paintings. He needed to paint. And when I set up that podcast, like everyone had too much time on their hands early days of COVID, because all the things you would normally do, like my gym was shut and there was all these things you just couldn't do.
Mm.
So it was an element of I wanted an outlet and I had a very low bar. My bar was if I can positively impact one person as a result of what I put out there, then it's worth it. Client acquisition wasn't a thing. Rising numbers wasn't a thing. It was just just do it. And I do think when you do something publicly, you're holding yourself to a higher standard. If I was just recording hypnosis sessions to myself in a room and playing them back, I don't think I would have unleashed the same level of resources of thinking, no, other hypnotherapists are going to hear my stuff, right? And then that held me to a higher level. That definitely helped. But I remember on a recent talk I did about podcasting for therapists, I looked back at the historical data and there was a day. So I launched it in March and there was a day in May where there was 0 downloads that day. And if I would have been, driven by the numbers and the metrics, that would have been the day that I threw the towel in. And it's like, I can't justify this time to not have anyone listening. Why am I doing this? But because I didn't even pay attention to begin with, I just did it. And then I got lucky because I accidentally found a way of training the algorithm. So I did a hypnosis session based on the movie Limitless. And I did a Facebook post and I said, if anyone's seen the movie Limitless, I've just created a hypnosis session inspired by the movie. If you want to have a listen to the recording, let me know and I'll send it over. And what they thought they were getting was an MP3. What I was actually sending them is the link to the podcast. And in doing so, I was training the algorithm. So then it's like, oh, people are watching this. I'm going to put this in front of more people. I had no idea I was doing that, but that's what was happening. And then that gets you this kind of launch velocity, and then it takes on a life of its own. But most podcasts never get out of orbit, and then they're stuck around this kind of 10, 15, 20 kind of views or downloads. And it's just, and then it gets to a point where it's like, well, what am I doing this for? People don't want it. But what they haven't figured out is they just needed the right catalyst to get to that point where it becomes self-sustaining. And most podcasts never get to that.
No. I think I heard something, must have been about a year ago, so I don't know if the stat still remains, that to get into the top echelon of podcasts, can you guess? I'd be curious to know, can you guess how many episodes someone needs to do to become like the minority, like within the 1% of podcasts? Can you guess how many episodes, what
Yeah,
threshold they have to
I've
hit?
heard a stat that 80% of people quit before they get to episode 10. I think to get to the top 1%, I'd probably say it's low, like 100 or 150, something like
Yeah,
that.
it was episode 28.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're at the majority quit at 10, and then like the last stragglers get to like maybe episode 28,
Mm.
not seeing that traction, and they stop there and then.
But I
Yeah.
would also say, because there is this element of consistency, which I think is true, but there's also that misattributed Einstein quote of the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And I think, yeah, it's stupid to give up after 9 episodes, but it's also stupid to be doing 1,000 episodes if you haven't reached that launch velocity and you've actually
Mm.
got an ever increasing audience base. Like you want to have a stop loss. So you say, right, well, I've tried this thing based on one of my favorite phrases is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the amount of effort I put in worth what comes out? And at that point, maybe those people that quit at 25 or 26 and never get to 28 and in the top 1% is because it just isn't the best use of their time. And it isn't for everyone. And I think again, that's where, people talk about motivation, all these kind of like, kind of personal development, like, oh, you need motivation, you need passion, but you also need things like discernment and self-reflection and good decision making. And when you've got those resources, it's, a great question to figure out and avoid the sunk cost fallacy is knowing what I now know, would I actually make this decision now? And if you've done 500 episodes and you're still getting like 30 people listening, you'd be like, well, knowing what I now know, was it worth it to get to this point? Probably not. In which case, cut your losses and deploy the same energy, emotion, and time into something that could give you a better return on that
Yeah.
on that energy.
That makes sense. And I guess it all comes down to, again, what problem are you trying to solve, right? So like with this podcast, for example, there is no way I'm going to make money from it because hypnotherapists as a niche, just speaking frankly, isn't a very profitable niche. But because I've got a platform where it can get views, it just allows me to have really great conversations with people that
Mm.
I really want to have conversations with. So it's a wonderful way to network and have fun and I suppose have a feeling of community and growth from an industry that can feel quite lonely at times.
It's very solitary because you're in a room either with someone, kind of, you know, that's going through some stuff, or, as I do it, and I don't know if you do it mainly on Zoom, but someone on a screen. And I think that's why the conferences are so popular, because you can actually kind of connect with other people that are just as crazy as we are. They're spending a lot of time dealing with people in dealing with difficult things, depending on what the niche is. It might be real severe trauma or anxiety or some pretty dark habits. And I'm sure you've worked with some clients that have gone through some really, really dark shit. And you need a certain element of feeling like, oh, I'm not the only one doing this, so that helps. My first podcast wasn't The Hypnotist. It was a podcast called Modern Mindset. And and I looked at it as you've just described it. It's an excellent reason to have conversations with really interesting people, because when I framed it as like A or B, like if I went up to someone, let's say an author of a book or someone, good in a particular area, and I said, you know, you seem like a really interesting person. Can I have a chat to you for half an hour? You'd be like, oh, that's a bit weird. Okay. But if you say, I've got a podcast, I think you make an excellent guest. What's actually happening is you're having this half an hour, 45-minute conversation. But one gives you that kind of ability to do that. And what you're doing is you're playing to kind of an element of ego. You're playing to this element of collective community. And I was lucky because before the podcast, I had a radio show for 2 years. So when people come into this kind of like studio environment, it feels that. So that gave me a lot of confidence actually having conversations with very high up kind of people. It's like people are just people, like you're just having a chat with another human. But I didn't really had that before. Yeah, it is fascinating. I think you've just got to have a reason to do it. If you're going to have a podcast, if you're going to have a YouTube channel, if you're going to have a TikTok channel, have a reason where it becomes a double bind. So whatever happens, you're winning.
Yes.
And what you've found is that kind of Buddha quote, which is, if you enjoy if you love what you do, you don't have to work a day in your life. Like if you enjoy the podcast, then any upside is just icing on the cake. And a lot of people don't do that. They have strings attached, and it's more like, if I don't get clients, if I don't get this, then I'm not going to do it. You take that energy to it, it's going to be very difficult, because people can kind of pick that up when you do it. If you do it from a place of, real fascination or curiosity or whatever it is, people also pick up on that.
Yeah. There's something that I heard literally this morning at the gym, and I thought, okay, if for some reason the conversation goes near here, I've got to share it with someone, because it was just wonderful. Where they spoke about when growing your business, or growing a hypnotherapy practice, or growing anything, and people talk about North Star. And this particular person says, I think it might be bullshit. I don't think we need one North Star. I think maybe we need two. Because if the North Star is getting clients, then naturally everything you're going to do is going to veer more towards, okay, buy my shit constantly, constantly. And at some point, your followers are going to go down to zero,
Mm.
right? But if the metric or the North Star is, I just need to grow my audience, well, the downstream effect of that is poverty, right? Because no one's actually going to start buying your stuff. You're just going to have an audience that grows. So they painted this wonderful metaphor of like a rowing boat that's got two oars. And it's really great to have two different oars, one that's maybe a quantitative, like North Star for your practice or your business, and one that's a qualitative one. And as long as you just keep rowing on both of those, then you're going to get somewhere. It's going to feel like this as you're doing it, sort of moving from side to side.
Mm.
But I just thought that was a wonderful metaphor that I hadn't heard before, because I'd always heard the metric of the North Star, as opposed to two North Stars that allow you to get really the most juice out of the lemon.
Yeah, and I guess there's a couple of ways of looking at that. One is kind of like, it's the yin and the yang. You need balance and
Yeah.
and that element. And the second is, well, what if you make the North Star something that encapsulates building an audience and generating clients, to use your example? If you call it, I'm going to make X amount of money, that's one. And if it's this amount of reach, it's another. But what if it's a phrase like impact? I'm going to impact, and I that was one of my goals, is that I wanted, to impact 1 million people through my hypnosis. That could be clients that see me face to face. That could be people listen to my podcast, my YouTube channel. And then it kind of felt like it encapsulated lots of different things. So I think, one, it's about defining what you want to do. And also, does that thing genuinely make you feel excited about the idea. You
Mm.
know, for some people, the financial side is the thing, but I think if the primary goal is to extract value, people get a sense of that. And equally, people don't like martyrs. It's like, oh, I do everything for everyone else and I don't get anything for myself. Equally, that's quite an icky kind of thing as well. I think what most people like is this kind of win-win outcome where it's kind of like, I believe that if I do a really good job for my clients, I also benefit from that because I feel good and proud about what I do. The side effect, if I've done really well for the client in front of me, and then the hypnosis I record for that, I publish, and a few thousand people hear that, and one person really resonates with that, well, then there's another thing. And I think when you look at how much value can you create in this kind of ripple effect, well, that's helpful. My belief when it comes, because I have a whole course called Hypnotic Wealth, my beliefs on wealth is that generally um, wealth is as a byproduct of either the value you create for the world or your ability to take good quality risks. And if you do both of those things, you become very, very wealthy. I think the mindset of a lot of people is the opposite of giving value, is extracting value. What can I get? What's in it for me? And people pick up on that. And a lot of people don't take any risks. So if you don't take any risks and you're all about extracting value, very difficult to be successful in a business or successful in life because effectively, why would someone want to work with someone that's all take and no give? But equally, if it's all give and you don't benefit from that, that also doesn't quite make sense as well. Like there's
Mm.
people that create value for the world and don't have any kind of tools to monetize that or get some value. And it's a balance. It really is a balance. You want to make it good for the world and good for yourself. And then who loses? Like
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people afraid of success because it's like, but I don't want to be greedy and I don't want to have too much. And there's poor people in the world. It's like you can't help poor people in the world if you're also poor, you know.
Mm.
But if you become wealthy, you could be a philanthropist, you know, why not help other people? But you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to have it before you can give it.
Mm. There's an element of like a game theory 101 there, isn't there?
Mm, absolutely.
And so, if you could have a conversation with a room full of, let's say, hypnotherapists, and we could throw coaches into the equation as well, and there was one big domino thing that you could say, knowing that you wouldn't hurt anyone's feelings. No one could be offended, but you just knew, gosh, it's the truth, and gosh, I hope this lands with them. What do you think that would be?
I think we know what that thing is because when you see billionaires being interviewed, you know, there's a PR consequence from them ruffling feathers.
Mm.
So generally, the thing that doesn't ruffle feathers and is quite positive and feels quite profound is follow your passion, follow your dreams. You know, generally that's the thing.
Mm.
But I would say, and there is truth to that. Like, do the thing that is kind of important, but equally, I don't think necessarily the goal is to not ruffle the feathers. You know, that wouldn't offend anyone. I think the key leverage point really is, you know, if I was to say something that definitely would ruffle a few feathers, which would be actually more useful than just like follow your dreams, is you know, break a few rules, do things differently, take some oversized risks that you know you could end up losing everything, but you're going to learn a hell of a lot. That I think would be more useful for the average person than just follow your dreams because they've heard that before. People don't normally say, you know, it could go horribly wrong, but risk it anyway, you know, or break some rules. There's a lot of people, oh, play it safe. And I remember this lady in my class in clinical hypnotherapy. I made a website and it said psychologist Adam Cox, and she said you can't call yourself a psychologist. I said, I've got a psychology degree. I know a lot about psychology. Why not? She's like, but you haven't gone through the British Psychological Association, British Psychological Society pathway, and you need to do this to call yourself a psychologist. And I remember thinking, this is a rule follower, and she is not going to do very well.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, you know, and I said to her, I said, if they've got a problem with it, they can ask me to change it. But you can't. You're not allowed. It's like, all right, well, they could say I can't. Like, I would rather take a risk, you know, break a rule, and then rein it in, then never do that, because otherwise you're assuming you know what the boundaries of your capabilities and your limitations are. So in order to do that, you have to take oversized risks and you have to break a few rules. Otherwise, what if you're living in this simulation where you've assessed it wrong and your beliefs become the boundary of what you're doing rather than your capabilities because you've never taken that shot. So that that is, I would say, something that a lot of people are like, oh no, he's totally wrong there, but I think I'm right.
Yeah, and that's okay, right?
Hmm.
It reminds me of Elon Musk. I think some students went to sort of go around the Tesla factory with him, and they said, "Right, have you got anything to say to the future engineers, Elon, of people who want to be motivated to do this?" He said, "Yeah, sure. If you need motivation to do this, don't do it." And it was just this lovely thing where all these people thought they were going to hear these wonderful, wise words. It's the same as someone like Seth Godin, who just people say, "God, what would you do if you couldn't fail?" He's like, "That's a horrendous question. What would you do if you still knew you were going to fail?" And
Mm.
it completely just spun on its head. And I feel like there's the synergy with what you're saying there about just like take some risks. So I ask for forgiveness instead of permission to some extent.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And don't be reckless, but equally, I think good risks are you've weighed it up and the risk return ratio. And the reason I became self-employed at 23 is because if it goes horribly wrong at 23, I can get a job. But if it goes right, then you can accumulate wealth and freedom very early on, and that gives you so much more flexibility as to what you do. The time to take risks when you've got less to lose, but it's counterintuitive. Most people don't quit their job and set up a business at the age of 23. That's the best time to do it. It's probably not the best time to do it when you've got no business experience. You're in your 40s, you've got a big mortgage and kids, and it's like, right, I'm gonna follow my dreams now. It's like, well, that could go horribly wrong and affect more than just you. So it's like, definitely take the risks, but kind of mitigate the risks by making that kind of risk reward ratio kind of decisions where you want the big upside. And if it goes wrong, yeah, your ego's bruised a little bit, but you're probably wiser for it.
Yeah, and better stories to tell, right?
Of course.
Okay. And so I'm very aware of your time. I want to make sure again we squeeze as much juice from the lemon. And what do you think at the moment, maybe in today's society, are the biggest mistakes that people are making with hypnosis or in therapy generally? If we park business to the side, let's talk just about
Yeah.
the therapeutic intervention itself.
I would say there is this whole misconception like hypnosis is control. I think the most disempowering belief that people have about hypnosis is that it's something that happens to them rather than with them.
Mm,
And I think with therapy, there is this kind of premise, even now, that people are broken or they need healing. There is this unconscious medical metaphor underlying therapy. It's like, we need to talk about mental health. It's kind of like, well, what if health is the wrong model? What is the wrong paradigm for it? And I really liked the early NLP days where it's like, okay, you're not broken. You've just learned a strategy that isn't useful for what you're trying to do. I think learning as a metaphor and competency and strategies is a much more useful framework than health because it's like, well, I don't have good mental health. Like that's such a weird statement to even
mm,
even say. Like it doesn't make sense. I have anxiety as if it's a physical object. No, you experience anxiety. So I think there's a paradigm that's very unhealthy and it's propagated by social media of influential people trying to get, social credit and kind of posturing by, I'm really depressed, but I'm going through it. It's like that's not helpful. And a lot of the time it isn't true. So I think, mainly the key thing is like, are we operating from the right paradigm
mm,
and the right metaphor of what therapy is for? And I think not. I talk a lot about neuroplasticity with clients. It's like, well, you've got this neural pathway where you feel a certain way and you do this certain thing. But luckily, there's trillions of neurons in your brain, and we can create a new neural pathway that's way more empowering. How does that sound? Also, I don't have to talk about a traumatic childhood. No, probably not best to even, let's just focus on what we actually do want.
yeah, fantastic. And do you think that many hypnotherapists are somehow bringing that into their practice as well?
You can't not do that. I think whatever the belief system you have, you take with you. But belief systems are like the lens that you see the world. If you believe that, and some of it is going to come down to motives. If you are the archetype of a healer and you're trying to kind of heal the sick, you're going to be using things like healing, as the metaphor. You're going to see your clients as broken and sick, and that will come across in body language, facial expressions, tonality. If you were to visiting a sick person, there's that kind of that facial expression, that posture. I'm sure there's some therapists that look at their clients like that.
Mhm.
And I don't look at a client, even if they've got, deep addictions, even if horrible stuff, they're not broken. They're not messed up. They're not sick. It's just they're trying to cope with a situation that was unfavorable in the best way that they can. And what if they're not utilizing the best strategy to do that? In which case, is there a different area of their life that they operate things in a different way? Maybe we can activate that neural pathway, map it across to this new context, condition that in so it becomes the default. Maybe that's more helpful. But I don't
Yeah.
look at my clients, and some clients want that. They want to feel that they're broken. And actually what they want is sympathy and they want empathy. I'm not the right kind of therapist for those. I love it when they say, I do this thing and I don't want to do this thing. Can you help? It's like, what do you want the new thing to be?
Mm.
That's great. But I would be a frustrating therapist for some of these clients that want sympathy and they want that kind of, would you want a tissue? Like, I don't have time for that. Like
Mm.
it's, you know, what change should we make and what's the best way of making it?
Were you ever like that? Because I think for the first 3 to 4 years, maybe 3 years, I found myself, and I think a lot of hypnotherapists find this when they first start, that I was working with people trying to get them from 0 to 1. And then I found out that it seemed to take just as much mental energy to take someone from 1 to 20 as it did from 0 to 1. So did you ever like go down that path and maybe make that mistake? Or did you inherently always know this is the style that I'm going to have, this is what I'm going to double down on when I'm
I,
working with
I, I
people?
think I think because I was so influenced by early Bandler and Grinder and that element of rejecting the medical model.
Mm,
For me, that was my belief system. And so again, I act like that belief system is true. Now, to someone else, they'd be horrified. And they're like, but it is mental health and people are really struggling. It's like, yeah, they're struggling. But what if they're struggling because they've got an unconscious strategy that isn't conducive to the life they want to live? Doesn't mean that they're broken, doesn't mean that they're sick. And I think, a lot of this paradigm has been propagated by the pharmaceutical industry because if someone is mentally ill, well, then tablets is what you would do for a mental
of
illness.
course.
Kind of makes sense. And there's a lot of money involved in that. It's not helpful for the pharmaceutical industry to say that depression is just a particular thinking strategy, that gets them in a particular emotional state consistently, because antidepressants probably wouldn't be the right way of dealing with that particular thing. And I'm not saying there aren't certain things. Like I don't think hypnotherapy is the right thing to deal with schizophrenia, for example. Like there's certain things that you would find in the DSM-5 that, probably is more within the realm of, let's say, GPs and kind of, let's say, psychiatrists. But equally, I wouldn't say a phobia is that. I wouldn't say that feeling anxious in social situations is that. I would say like this is where we should be working with clients to kind of say, right, where did this come from? What would you prefer? And to do it in a more pragmatic way.
Yeah. When it comes to things like anxiety, I'm sure you've seen hundreds of people who fall into that category, even generalized anxiety disorder. And do you talk to them about any physical aspects that can be contributing? Because I feel like there's more research coming out nowadays. There's so many environmental factors that can cause anxiety versus just very specific social situations. Sometimes it can be mercury poisoning from fillings that they had. So amalgam filling, sometimes it's just severe
Hmm.
gut inflammation. Is that something that ever creeps its way into the sessions at all?
I mean, it can be because sometimes it's nutrition, sometimes it's lack of exercise. So you've
Yes.
you've got to you've got to be playing detective and figuring out like because it isn't always a thought, it's not always a belief system or a coping strategy or a thinking thing. Um, you know, Sometimes it might be behavioral. But again, I think a good therapist is asking the right questions to say like, what would naturally have to happen for this to be um happening in the way that it's happening?
Mm.
then challenging that. It's kind of looking at that. So quite often I'll have behavioral approaches. I'll say, right, between now and the next session, I need you to do these things, because sometimes, if it's all thinking about stuff, well, that's not the same as experiential. So you want the behavioral stuff in there as well.
Yeah. And just before we begin wrapping up, Adam, I'm always curious. You mentioned something that might have been in a previous podcast. I mean, in my opinion, I think you share this. The perfect hypnosis experience is something like a spider phobia, where at the end you can give them a tarantula to hold, and suddenly you've closed that loop, and there is some sort of genuine experience that allows them to cement the subconscious changes that have been made. What other tips and tools would you recommend for people to be able to try and take that approach to their practice? Meaning, when it comes to something like anxiety, that's much harder to test. Yes, someone can feel wonderful at the end of a session, but you could do that with any simple technique. What sort of things do you try to put in place in between sessions to allow them to ensure that the external reality matches the new internal reality?
One, you've got to pace the experience of the client. So what I say to clients is the evidence of good therapy session is what happens in your life. We're going to treat the time in between sessions as reconnaissance, operating from that tenet of NLP that there's no failure, only feedback. You either win or you learn. We either figure out, yeah, we found the thing that's improved it, or we've got really useful feedback to figure out what's the key area that we need to work on. And sometimes I'll give them little kind of challenges or kind of homework to do that. So if you've got, and I think too many hypnotherapists are scared of encouraging the client to test the work in case they fail, and they say, oh, it didn't work, but a lot of what makes hypnotherapy work is the confidence. So you say, right, we've done this. I want you to hang around the 3 or 4 people that would offer you cocaine, knowing that they will, and feeling absolutely empowered that you're not going to take it. I want you to do that. Now, if they're like, well, I'm going to stay away from those people because if they do, that's already disempowering. So you can give them the almost post-hypnotic suggestions. And once they've done that once, and they've turned that thing down, or they've gone to a cake shop and they've walked out without buying it, or whatever the thing is that kind of tests it, then they've got evidence. They've got a reference point for a new belief that something has changed. So I would say therapists should actively encourage the clients to test it. And you can do that in the mind with future pacing, but why not do it in reality? Because if they do it and they set the intention they're going to do that thing and they have the result, well, that's going to make them feel much more confident the next time they're in that situation.
Yeah. Adam, this has been so fun being able to talk today. Where can people find you?
So the main way I would say, as I've alluded to, I have this podcast called The Hypnotist. It's on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. So if you look for The Hypnotist or Adam Cox, The Hypnotist, you'll find that. I have a website, adamcox.co.uk. Lots of free resources on there. But I'll say the main thing is check out the podcast. You'll hear more about what I do. And there's loads of free stuff on every episode of the podcast. If you look in the description, there's things like a free course, free downloads, things that people might find useful, completely free, so they can check that out.
Perfect. And we can pop plenty of those links below here as well. So thank you, Adam, ever so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of The Hypnotist. If you've enjoyed this episode or got some value from it, please give it a 5-star rating and review. And maybe you know someone that would also benefit from this particular episode, in which case share the episode with them so they can also get the benefit too. And if you would like to listen to this episode where it's just the hypnosis, so no intro, no outro, no explanation, just the hypnosis and completely ad-free, there will be a link in the description where you can subscribe at a very low cost and only get access to the hypnosis. So if that's of interest, please check that out. Thank you again for being a regular listener of The Hypnotist, and I'll see you again soon for more.